All right, part 3. This is going to be the best one. Thanks for your patience. Had a little family emergency to learn sabr. So it's fundamentally confusing to the modern Reformationist point of view why traditionalists of various angles associate Islam or submission to God with submission to the words of men, even if they're divinely sanctioned men, but they're not formally and explicitly the words of God, hence Quranism. But if you look at the way the Quran frames and castigates those who, in that historical context, did not follow the words of the Prophet, alayhi salam, then we extrapolate that forward. And when Abu Bakr as Siddiq was elected by a corrupted backroom shura, he was later cast in the light of having nas, of having this divine ordination. And that's why he's called as-Siddiq. It's to make him seem to be a Zadik, like James as-Siddiq, the brother of Jesus alayhi salam. And here we have the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam's best friend, and it kind of made sense. And then when Uthman was elected, Ali alayhi salam was refused because he did not agree to follow the sunnah of Umar. So this idea of Nas continued into the caliphate of Umar and so on. And indeed, even with the Abbasid historiography, which codified a lot of what we understand as historical fact today, which may be subject to some revisionism with coinage and other archaeological evidence. But the Abbasids were also claiming a sort of Nas through Ibn Abbas having some sense of Nas and being a family member of the Prophet. So the thing is, Ibn Abbas is the guy who extrapolated idle hadiths leading you away from God as meaning music. And suddenly we have this idea of music in Sunni Islam and in Usuli Shiism, like 12er Shiism today, post Khomeini, as being like ear aids. Like if you listen to music, it's a sin. Rather than that, listening to music is taking you away from listening to lectures such as this, or such as what you might get on History Valley, or what you might get on other Quranist channels, or on Hamza Yusuf's channels, or whatnot, where you would be gaining knowledge, and that knowledge will serve you. That ilm will serve you in the path of God. And he also denigrated biblical study, and this is why there's no real history of serious Quran and Bible studies until the last 150, 200 years. And so Ibn Abbas certainly was not infallible, and yet he is held up as infallible, and it's a part of the Abbasid Caliphate. And yet, even then, the Abbasid caliphs could have appointed, and in a sense they did, appoint Mutazili thought leaders as imams, but ultimately it was not for very long. And what I think ultimately is true is that there is this degree of divine guidance, which is a supplement to the text, and sola scriptura is problematic. It's possible to read the Quran and take away from it vastly different things and argue from different epistemic vantage points interpreting the text. It's possible to translate the words differently. It's possible to splice and dice the syntax differently in order to parse fiqh, to parse injunctions out of the text. And it's possible to take misguidance from the Quran as much as guidance. And this is reflected in hadiths. This is something that Quranists have debated and is evidenced experimentally by the vast range of opinions in this movement. And we can't even agree on where the Hajj is to physically take place, or if Salah is a ritual or not. And this is something that's more of a minority thing than a ritualism and Quranism, but still, it shows to Goya that you need a frame to parse the text. So the Shia have some nice hadiths from their imams, and the Ismailis have, for instance, so this very modernist imam, but he's criticized for riding on a jet ski with his young girlfriend and having this yacht and having all this wealth. That sure he shares it, he helps the poor people in Borno, Badakhshan, and so on, but it's subject to critique. And so then Ismailis have to say, well, your Islam is corrupt, and we're like nice people. And he banned polygamy, and he made hijab optional. And the previous Imam, Aga Khan the third, was the one who said that we are in the Qiyamah era, and now it is time to adopt a somewhat different approach to the Sharia. So they pray a little bit differently. They don't do the ruku, for example. And for this, and some other things, though, like I mentioned earlier, you can take a mortgage. There's no prohibition against that in Ismailism. So for this, they're considered outside of Islam in perhaps an opposite angle than how Quranists are often considered outside of Islam. But if you look at the Sufis, and if you're willing to say that the Sufis are taking things from the Nahul Balaga of Imam Ali alayhi salam and so on, but the Sufis don't believe in that. But it doesn't matter if they've specifically. It's the same idea as that the message of the Quran is to have the Hanafiya, not that you have to eat with your right hand all the time and so on. That's a covenantal specific biyah that they took. Um, and that there are these different covenants. And so from a Shia point of view, not necessarily Ismaili, but they tend to be more esoteric. You could not necessarily believe in the high imamology, but you like your Sufi sheikh. And I heard a story from an Egyptian Sufi woman about a guy who, maybe this was in the Mamluk Caliphate. He would get up in the middle of the night and pray Tahajjud every night, and he would repeat Surah Ikhlas 1,000 times. And he got the guidance, and he started to teach, and he didn't have a formal usuli educational background or credential, and he started a tariqa, and people listened to him because he had the guy. God guides who he chooses, and this is actually a beautiful thing. This is good news. This means that it's possible to cultivate wisdom within logical epistemological frameworks and to critique them and reconstruct them, but it's also possible to have a mystical vein of direct guidance from God through the Ruhudus or angels, or however you want to frame that phenomenon. But it is a real phenomenon. And it also can occur among Christians. It can occur among people who are Hanifs in a more secular sense that are not formally ascribed, people like Nikola Tesla or even Einstein. And these guidances have been nudging humanity forward through these exceptional individuals. And to the extent that they've been imperfect, that they've embraced corruption, that they let the power go to their heads, and they deviated, then they would lose the guidance, and they could still have an impact. But that, someone like Edison, in contrast to Tesla, who was very fueled by greed and power, and was torturing elephants to death to make a point, and so on. Like, this is not as holy of a man. This is not a holy man, right? Maybe Tesla was, but not Edison. But Edison had the genius as well. And this term genius has the etymology of jinn, that the jinn energy came into you, and you were like, oh, I'm gonna and crack the philosopher's stone. But it's not necessarily the pure. So you're going to accomplish something, but it's not necessarily the pure guidance. And so if you want to go beyond genius, if you want to go beyond this dialectic of hadith and a nas dependence or an imam dependence, even if it's an imam like the Sunnis have, where ostensibly it's more based in reason and they're infallible, but they're still held with a reverence that they codified an understanding that we cannot reconstruct. They're just beyond us. You get away from that, and you liberate yourself from the tagut, from all idols, as this pure understanding of the Quran's message and this movement enjoins us to do. And yet there's more than just book learning. There is this mystical understanding, and somebody has to go in front, somebody has to lead, and that's the imamate. And it's a meta-imamate. It's an imamate that transcends these particular modalities, because God is beyond all of these particular modalities, and you're not bound by tradition in order to approach God, because God is outside of time, God is outside of culture, God is outside of the Quraysh or the Persians or whatever, the apostolic lineage, or the genius white people, or the genius whatever group you want to hold up. Forget about it. Pray for guidance. Let God guide you. Find the synchronicities. Read the things that are popping up that God is guiding you to. Piece them together, synthesize it. There's so much that we can do still. It's not necessarily that the Kiyama is going to be this imminent event, because there's AI that it's got to be the Dajjal, or maybe without the Dajjal, that just suddenly, this is a more Cronus version, that just suddenly Israfil is going to blow the horn and we're all going to drop dead. Maybe it's a nuke war. Maybe it's just magical. It doesn't matter. Once you're dead, you're dead. And then you get resurrected and you face your Lord. So why bother? It's eschatological. There's so much complexity. There's so much going on. No, you don't know. Even if you have a sapling in your hand and the hour is upon you, you can place that sapling in the ground and get hasanat for it. And there are things that we have left to do. We can promote forms of, not just one form, but forms of Islam, interpretations and understandings that that clear up all this nonsense, and that open a wide door for hundreds of millions of people to improve, even if they're not formally in a Quranic covenant with the shahada, or without whether you interpret it, you don't really believe the shahada is it, but they're doing the salah and so on, or they're Christians. They soften up on the Trinity stuff. They're more God focused. That Jesus is the path to God, as the Rasul is like the message of the Injil. And they become more Unitarian, or they're not even specifically theological, but they're not on the shirk so much. This is a Dawa win, and that the secular people can be framed up, and they're not debating about feminism versus dark enlightenment and so on. It's there's this wisdom that they're going to extrapolate, even if they're not doing it as a referential subscriber wholesale. There's a hadith that there will come a time where you follow 10%. If now you neglect 10% of it, you'll be ruined, but there will come a time when you follow 10%, it will save you. And this is the age of Qiyamah. And so even if, for instance, the Ismaili imams who are promulgating that idea are wrong, in the sense of they're not infallible, that it's not ideal to keep a yacht. Maybe you do nikah with a young woman in your 80s. That's your business, but that's her business as well, right? Maybe it is business. It's for the money. Okay, fine. That unto itself is not the problem. It's more about the use of the wealth, when you could be helping more people with that yacht money. But that fine. So he has that sin, and maybe he'll be judged for that. Maybe it's outweighed by all the good he's done. But we can take lessons and we can integrate it into this broader context. And if there is this whole time period, that means there's so much more for us to do. And not only can we do this incremental dawah, or we can do a more complete dawah, and maybe people become, Orthodox Maliki Asheris. Well, okay. Hopefully they don't go overboard with the slavery apologism and whatnot. That's still fine. It's not necessarily, they could go too far with it. It's better as long as they're not Salafis. It's okay. And we can save people's souls. We can save our own souls. We can improve the society. We can increase the clarity. We can increase the wisdom. We can inspire more imams. There can be a multitude of imamate, a hyper plethorization of imamiyah, that there's this amplitude of wisdom. And even in these small social media instances, it's like a mycelial bloom. And mashallah, indeed.